What's up, everybody, boys and girls, squids and squidlets? I am back with another video that is bound to blow the lid off the beginner bike baloney you've been told already. We all know what makes a good beginner bike, something with lots of power you can grow into, of course. You know, bikes like your Honda Fireblades or your Turbo Busas. These bikes can be a little expensive, so it's best to skimp out on riding gear and spend that money on extra carbon fiber parts or a stretched swing arm kit. This is all the best advice that you'd hear only here on Yammy Noob, and you should take it very, very seriously. I'm kidding, of course. The AtGad evangelists can stop freaking out in the comments section below now. A good beginner bike should strike a balance between approachability and affordability. Unfortunately, this Venn diagram is massive, and there are plenty of bikes that are either low on power or cheap to purchase that will still make your foray into motorcycling much more difficult than it needs to be. So with all that being said, today we're going to talk about 7 motorcycles beginners should probably avoid. Some of these will be categories of bikes as opposed to a specific model, so just keep that in mind. It won't be all like, don't start on a Kawasaki Vulcan. That's not something I would ever say, you know? Wink, wink. Today's video is sponsored by our friends at ASV Inventions. Now let's get into it. The first motorcycle you should avoid as a beginner is a mini bike like a Honda Grom, Kawasaki Z125, or CF Moto Papio. Now you might be thinking, but Papa Yam, these bikes are low on power and cheap to purchase. Doesn't that make them the ideal beginner bike? And yes, while it is a valid concern, here in the US, a 125cc motorcycle just isn't gonna grant you the opportunity to grow and learn as a rider as you navigate traffic in a real world setting. Then in the event that you level up to an intermediate motorcycle, you are gonna be faced with an incredibly steep learning curve. These mini bikes are essentially toys. They're designed for goofing around and having fun on a low stakes machine. Their mile per hour maximum is about 55. Now bearing that in mind, this actually makes the Grom or Z125 a good second motorcycle. It's a bike that you can ride and let your hair down and relax a little after 186 mile an hour highway pulls on your 600. The Honda Grom and its adjacent mini bike constituents are by all intents and purposes a real motorcycle. And while they're referred to as mini bikes, they're far more advanced in components and stature than something like a Coleman's mini bike you can buy at Walmart. A Grom has a 125cc engine that makes about 10 horsepower, has a manual gearbox and independent front and rear brakes. So on paper, a new rider would have the opportunity to learn the functionality of a motorcycle's controls perfectly well on a bike like this. But understanding how to get a bike moving and stopping while you move up and down the gears is only a small fraction of what a new rider needs to learn about riding. You need to learn how to navigate traffic situations, maneuver the bike through turns and corners, conquer highway riding, and master slow speed maneuvers. Learning these skills on Grom or a similar motorcycle will create an unrealistic benchmark for your riding ability going forward. And again, they max out at like 55 miles an hour. A Grom can get you from A to B in an urban downtown environment, but you will be hard pressed to do any interstate highway cruising. And I don't think you want to be the first of your riding buddies to get a ticket for going too slow. I say pass on the mini bike as your very first motorcycle. The next ill-advised beginner bike I see so often in the young adult hipster demographic is the cursed Cafe Racer Project bike. We all know this guy. He's got the flannel, the chin beard, the red wing boots, and the terrible music taste. And his entire personality will become about being a custom bike builder the minute he buys some wretched 4-year-old UJM and installs some Clubman handlebars. Buying an old UJM makes sense to some people. They're cheap, their hard parts are absolutely bulletproof, and there's something charming about a tastefully refurbished vintage bike. It's not that hard to find old bikes like a Honda CB or Suzuki GS for $1 grand or $2 depending on their condition. These air-cooled 4-cylinder engines run forever, and many larger models are shaft-driven, so you have one less piece of maintenance to worry about. But that's about where the positives end. Buying a very old Japanese motorcycle as your first and only bike means you're going to be spending more time working on it than you're ever going to be riding it. You're going to be replacing the dry rotted tires and track down electrical faults in a rat's nest or a wiring harness. The carbs will need to be cleaned and then rejetted if you intend on modifying the exhaust or airbox. Even completely stock with a cleaned carb, these old UJM bikes run super lean and have no power until about halfway in the rev range. If you intend on doing any customization to an old UJM bike, then you have to deal with tracking down parts on eBay, custom fabbing universal parts that never fit properly, or paying through the nose for parts from a company that specifically makes parts for custom Cafe Racer motorcycles. And by the time it's said and done, you'll have spent so much money and time, had endless headaches, and likely punched a few holes in the drywall in your garage, when instead, you could have just bought a retro beginner bike like a Fartpillin 401, a Honda SCL 500, 500 or even a Royal Enfield and spent your time riding instead of wrenching. Now, I'm sure it is incredibly gratifying to build a custom bike from the ground up, but if you want to be a motorcyclist and ride your motorcycle, save the project bike for a second or third bike and actually enjoy your time riding on a bike that starts every time and won't leave you stranded because the rectifier fried or the throttle cable snapped. Maintaining a vintage bike can be difficult. The parts have the guaranteed fitment that never quite fit right, the bolts are likely to strip, and everything is seized together with decades worth of corrosion. But you know what's easy? Installing a set of levers from ASV. Whether you're looking to replace a broken lever or improve the functionality and feel of your existing set, ASV is the brand to go with. They've built their levers to be unbreakable, so no matter how hard you go down, you can trust ASV is going to be intact. And should you do the unthinkable and break them, ASV will replace them with their unmatched warranty program. ASV is owned and operated by riders, and they've been continuously improving them over the last 2 decades to bring you the best levers possible. And they're based here in the good old US of A. They've got levers for dirt bikes and street bikes and have a catalog spanning back 25 years, so no matter what you ride, ASV has a set for you. If you follow the link in the description and use the code YAMMY, you will be able to receive 15% off of your order. Again, hit that link below, use the code YAMMY for 15% off. Thanks to ASV for the support on the channel. Now back to the video. Speaking of crusty old bikes, another category of bikes beginners should avoid are old cruisers. If you want to ride a cruiser, that's fine, but there have been plenty of newly revamped cruiser bikes that offer a contemporary package without the headache that comes from a lumpy old piece of crap. So I'm talking about bikes like the old Honda Rebels or the Suzuki Intruders or the Kawasaki Kawasaki Vulcan. Oh my god, I can't say it. Essentially, don't buy a metric Sportster clone from 25 years ago that has all the shortcomings of a Sportster without the brand recognition or aftermarket support. Many of the issues found with buying old UJM Cafe Racer bikes can also be seen on buying old cruisers as well. Yes, they're usually pretty heavy and pretty slow. They're often pretty cheap too. But if the tenets of the American free market tell us anything, they are cheap because the demand is low and the supply is high. The engines in these bikes might run forever, but no one wants the damn things anymore. Now when you can get something like a Rebel 500 that's modern, decently quick for a beginner, and going to last a long time without any problems. Considering how competitive manufacturers are trying to be in the beginner segment, you can get a lot of bike for your money these days. That being said, it's not really worth the headache of buying a super cheap old cruiser that has electrical gremlins or wants to rattle itself apart. These bikes might be cheap, but they are old, slow, and heavy. I never thought I'd have to actually explicitly state this, but you never know. Don't buy an Amazon Chinese bike as your first motorcycle. Actually, don't buy one at all. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but I keep seeing people buy them and I'm starting to lose faith. These bike-in-a-box motorcycles that you find on Amazon are the worst way you can spend a couple $1,000s. These motorcycles are made with the cheapest components possible from the bottom of the bargain bin. They typically use engines cloned from old air-cooled Honda or Suzuki dirt bikes, and they should run just fine if it weren't for the fact that the engine cases are filled with dust and metal shavings from the factory. These bikes also require final assembly after delivery, which a beginner rider is likely not going to know how to do properly. And if a motorcycle isn't set up properly to begin with, it is more likely to break and fall apart under normal use and pose a safety risk to the rider. I've had first-hand experience with this. I bought the Boom BD250 with my own money just to see if an Amazon bike from China is as truly bad as you think it's going to be. And believe me, it is just as bad, if not worse than you think it will be.
It cannot carve a planted straight line. It literally just keeps wandering and trying to find a line. This bike is so unbelievably bad.
You can go back and watch the videos if you don't believe me. These bikes are incredibly cheaply made and borderline unsafe. If you buy a Chinese Amazon motorcycle and you manage to come to your senses before it completely implodes, you'll be hard-pressed to sell it for anything more than a couple $100. If you decide to continuously nurse it back to health, you'll be limited in what parts you can find for it, and no reputable motorcycle tech is going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. It is really not a good idea to buy one of these bikes, especially if you're a beginner. If you spend a lot of time hanging around a Planet Fitness or maybe a Buffalo Wild Wings, you may hear leader bike chads talking about how a 600 class sport bike is the perfect beginner motorcycle. They'll say, bro, they're gutless down low, just shift early and you'll be fine. Or they'll say, I started on a 600 and look how I turned out, while they take a shot of Jägermeister and scream at the waitress because they ordered boneless wings, but they were sent bone-in. And for the easily influenced beginner squid, it may be hard to ignore rhetoric that powerful, but here, listen to me. Do not start on a 600cc sport bike. Sure, They often don't make much power until well into the rev range, but once the testosterone-addled mind experiences that top-end rush for the first time, you are going to require immense willpower to be able to resist the urge to wind a 600 out every time you open the throttle. Just like children shouldn't be allowed ungoverned access to the internet, a baby squid shouldn't be trusted with a 120 horsepower 600. Plus, a 600cc sport bike poses many other disadvantages for someone just learning to ride. The highly committed riding position may not inspire confidence in a new rider, forcing them to be hunched over in the pocket of the motorcycle. The lack of low-down torque isn't ideal for around town street use either, and the low speed around town riding is likely where a new rider is going to get their bearings. If a 600 is designed to be ridden at the top of the rev range, that alone should indicate it is not ideal for a beginner rider. So no matter how many trailer park jixers your buddies send you on Facebook Marketplace, repeat after me, just say no. Another ill-advised motorcycle for beginner is a big, heavy touring bike. Sure, you can find an older Goldwing or some other used metric touring bike for pretty cheap, but if you're still getting around your bearings as a new motorcyclist, you're gonna have a hell of a time muscling that thing around. So much of learning to ride is about becoming fluid with your control of the motorcycle, giving it everything it needs to be smooth, controllable, and predictable power. It is also about understanding how to move the bike side to side through turns and corners and how to easily navigate in tight spaces and low speeds. You're gonna feel like you're in control of the bike, not the one that it's taking you for a ride. This is going to be a lot harder if you're on a bike that weighs 6, 7, or even 800 pounds. Sure, these bikes don't make that much power, relatively speaking, and with the engorged footprint, they aren't going to get away from you too badly. But you haven't mastered throttle control yet. The sheer magnitude and size isn't going to be conducive to learning how to be a good motorcycle. That's how you end up with the all middle-aged men who talk about having been riding for 20 years but can't actually ride anything other than a bloated bagger in a straight line. And the last motorcycle you shouldn't buy as a beginner is just anything that's too expensive. Sure, you can find a bike that doesn't make too much power and isn't too large, but spending more than like $7,000 or $8,000 out the door for your first motorcycle is just not that wise in my opinion. Thank God they don't make them anymore, but a few years ago, beginner riders would go to a Harley-Davidson dealership and buy a brand new Iron 883 for like $12,000. Don't do that. That's a bad idea for like a million reasons, but the same can be said for other motorcycles too. For instance, say you're an older rider with a little bit of maturity and experience riding dirt bikes or driving manual cars, you probably still shouldn't buy something like a Ducati Scrambler or an Indian Scout 60 as your first bike. Each of those are good bikes and they could be manageable enough for the right person, making the kind of beginner plus amounts of power, but they each have an MSRP of over $11,000. Theoretically, you might end up loving the bike and all is well, but oftentimes as you learn more about riding and become a better rider, your taste and preferences dramatically change quickly. And it's a lot easier to move on from a $6,000 beginner bike than a $12,000 beginner bike, should you decide you want something different or maybe you don't even want to ride at all, because believe it or not, that happens more often than we two-wheeled lifers like to think. Makes me sad, but some people jump on and they say, it's not for me. God, I don't even know how it's possible, but still. Not to mention that many new riders end up dropping or damaging their bikes in some capacity. So just keep that all-in price in mind when getting a first bike. Just because a motorcycle might not be powerful enough to yeet you into the sun, you might still yeet yourself into a small pit of financial ruin. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the 7 types of motorcycles a new rider should avoid. If you're seeing this video too late and have already gotten yourself one of these bikes, don't beat yourself up too much about it. Just let me know down below in the comments which one you got. Just make do with what you got and enjoy the ride. Thanks for watching, everybody. Fact: Australia is wider than the diameter of the moon. Goodbye.
Wake up! You're dreaming! You're dreaming! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! None of this is real! None of it's real! None of it's real! Wake up! Keep watching Amy Noob.